chatter coming out of East Hampton tonight is louder than a courthouse bell, and the whispers around this Jay-Z and Beyoncé situation just flipped the entire script sideways. The man who allegedly rammed a green Subaru straight through the front gate of Jay-Z and Beyoncé's fortress-level Hamptons compound has walked into a court. As y'all remember, just a handful of days ago, a Bronx man by the name of Keith Jonathan Webster allegedly steered a green Subaru at high speed directly toward the reinforced entrance gate of Jay-Z and Beyoncé's East Hampton estate. And the impact was not a fender tap. It was not a wrong turn moment. It was a full-throttle collision that caused structural damage to a security gate built to stop exactly this kind of intrusion. Family, that plea is either the boldest gamble in celebrity-adjacent legal history, or there is a version of this story that the public has not been told. Now, the judge did not simply take the plea and send everyone home. Because after Keith Jonathan Webster entered that not guilty plea, the judge went ahead and issued a restraining order that legally bars Keith Jonathan Webster from contacting Beyoncé, from contacting Jay-Z, or from setting foot anywhere near that East Hampton residence while the criminal proceedings are pending. That is a hard legal wall. That is the court telling Keith Jonathan Webster that even though he is pleading innocent, the state is going to treat him like a credible threat until proven otherwise. And that is the tension, y'all. A man that is somebody either lost in a fog of confusion or somebody deliberately mapping a target. And the confusion narrative from the police is doing a lot of heavy lifting in a case where the physical evidence is telling a much sharper story. Now listen, Jay-Z and Beyoncé themselves have not issued any form of public statement about this incident. And frankly, based on how these two operate, they are not going to. Jay-Z and Beyoncé were seen publicly at the World Cup just days after the collision, moving through the crowd as though the front gate of and whether Keith Jonathan Webster's intent was premeditated, whether Keith Jonathan Webster's intent was accidental, whether Keith Jonathan Webster genuinely believed he was navigating toward a completely different address, the impact of that vehicle on that specific gate was so severe that the physics alone becomes circumstantial evidence. Because you do not accidentally accelerate a Subaru into a reinforced celebrity gate at that velocity. And what is happening to Chadwick Boseman's family right now, 6 years after his passing, is the kind of legal storm that nobody should ever have to endure while still grieving. Family, I need you to take a breath before we go into this, because it is a lot. Chadwick Boseman's older brothers, Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman, have just filed a full-scale legal offensive against Chadwick Boseman's widow, Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman, in a Los Angeles court. And the accusations inside this filing are the kind of accusations that you do not walk back once they are on the record. Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman are alleging that Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman has been sitting on millions of dollars in assets from Chadwick Boseman's estate, allegedly failing to distribute those assets to Chadwick Boseman's grieving parents, and allegedly ignoring a binding 2022 court order that was supposed to divide the estate down the middle. 50% to the widow, 50% to Chadwick Boseman's parents. That was the order. That was the law. And that, according to these filings, is not what happened. Now, let me back up and give y'all the context, because the history here matters. When Chadwick Boseman passed away, he did so without a legal will in place. That is a devastating piece of information because Chadwick Boseman was a man of significant wealth, significant intellectual property, significant film residuals, significant insurance holdings, and without a will, all of those assets fell into. That is how the system is designed to work. But then, back in 2022, a judge stepped in and issued a formal ruling that the remaining assets of Chadwick Boseman's estate were to be split 50-50. Half to Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman, half to Chadwick Boseman's parents. That was the ruling. That was the legal instruction. And according to the explosive new filing from Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman, that ruling has been sitting on paper for nearly 4 years while Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman has allegedly maintained full control of the estate, allegedly kept Chadwick Boseman's parents entirely in the dark about the finances, and allegedly failed. They are asking the court to force a complete accounting of every asset she has controlled since Chadwick Boseman passed. They are asking the court to strip her of her administrator powers immediately. And they are asking the court to block her from signing any future deals related to Chadwick Boseman's name, likeness, or intellectual property until this whole matter. This is a family with lawyers, with dates, with dollar figures, with court references, and with a clear legal endgame. Family, this is the exact reason why every single adult, regardless of income, regardless of age, regardless of celebrity status, needs to have a legally executed will on file. Chadwick Boseman was a titan of his craft. Chadwick Boseman was a man of extraordinary income and extraordinary assets. And even Chadwick Boseman, at the height of his career, did not have a will in place when the unthinkable happened. And now, 6 years, physical walls. Financial walls. Reputational walls. Because if any single wall is not perfectly reinforced, the moment of impact will find it. Now let's pivot back to the Hamptons for a moment. Because there is a detail in the and that is a bet Keith Jonathan Webster is apparently willing to make. Now here is my honest read on it. When Detective Sergeant Jennifer Dunn described Keith Jonathan Webster as confused and not making explicit threats, that language is deliberate. Law enforcement officers do not use the word confused casually. That word is a legal preview. It is signaling that the defense may lean into a diminished, and that is exactly the courtroom moment Keith Jonathan Webster's defense team is trying to prevent from ever happening. Now, back to Los Angeles, because the Chadwick Boseman filing has one more layer that I want to make sure y'all fully understand. Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman are not just asking the court to redistribute the assets. Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman are asking the court to freeze any and all future deals involving Chadwick Boseman's name, likeness, or intellectual property until the accounting is complete. That is a massive move, because Chadwick Boseman's name and likeness are worth an extraordinary amount of money in a modern licensing environment. Chadwick Boseman's face on a poster is licensable revenue. Chadwick Boseman's voice on a documentary is licensable revenue. Chadwick Boseman's image in a video game, in a museum exhibit, in a commemorative piece of merchandise. Every single use is a revenue stream. And if the brothers succeed in freezing those deals, the entire commercial machinery around Chadwick Boseman's legacy stops until the court sorts it out. Which means Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman's response to this filing is going to be one of the most closely watched legal responses in celebrity-adjacent litigation this year. Because she has options. She can push back on the accuracy of the accounting. She can argue that the 2022 order is being misinterpreted. She can argue that the distribution has been happening in phases and that the brothers are jumping to conclusions. She can argue that certain assets are legally hers alone and were never part of the estate to begin with. Or she can settle. She can quietly negotiate with the brothers, quietly transfer the disputed portions, and quietly end this before it becomes any louder. The question is which path her legal team recommends, and how public she is willing to let this become. And y'all, I want to say this plainly because it needs to be said. Grief and money have destroyed more families than any other combination in the history of humanity. Grief opens the wound. Money pours the salt. And when you are talking about a family that already lost the brightest star in its constellation, and now the surviving members are being pulled in opposite directions by the machinery of probate law, the pain becomes generational. Chadwick Boseman's parents are elderly. Chadwick Boseman's brothers are grieving. Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman is grieving. Everyone in this equation lost the same person. And yet the system that is supposed to help them navigate that loss is instead pulling them apart at the seams. That is the tragedy underneath the headlines. Let me also say this, because I want to be balanced. It is very possible that Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman has been navigating a probate process so complex that the delays the brothers are calling deliberate are actually the natural drag of the American legal system moving assets through valuation, tax clearance, and estate-level tax filings. Probate is famously slow. Probate involving film residuals is even slower, because every studio, every streaming platform, and every licensing partner has to be individually contacted and their revenue streams individually documented. Probate involving intellectual property is slower still, because trademarks and image rights sit inside a labyrinth of federal filings that take years to fully catalog. So there is a scenario where Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman is doing exactly what a probate administrator is legally supposed to do, and the brothers are reading routine delays as intentional withholding. That scenario has to be on the table alongside the harsher scenario, and the court is going to have to figure out which one is closer to the truth. Now let me tie both of these stories together with a final thread, because there is a theme running through both of these court dockets that I do not think anyone has articulated yet. And that thread is this. The celebrity legal system is a slow, grinding, brutal machine that does not care about your fame, does not care about your talent, and does not care about your legacy. That machine will grind through Keith Jonathan Webster's not guilty plea until every camera angle has been reviewed. That machine will grind through the Chadwick Boseman estate filing until every dollar has been accounted for. And that machine does not accelerate for the famous. If anything, it decelerates, because the paperwork multiplies, the lawyers multiply, the appeals multiply, and every filing generates 3 more filings. Which means Jay-Z and Beyoncé are looking at months of litigation over this gate incident, and Chadwick Boseman's family is looking at potentially years of litigation over this estate. And nobody wins in a system that's slow. The lawyers win. The court reporters win. The clerks win. But the people at the center of the storm just keep bleeding time. Now, before I wrap this all up, I need to loop back to a piece of the Keith Jonathan Webster story that has been quietly nagging at me since I first read the reports. The travel pattern, the Montauk trip, the Maine beach visit, the second Montauk trip, the Georgia Pond arrival. That is not a random man's random day. That is somebody looking for something specific. And the question the court is going to have to answer at the July 29th hearing, and at every hearing after it, is what exactly Keith Jonathan Webster was looking for. Was Keith Jonathan Webster looking for the Jay-Z and Beyoncé residence specifically? Was Keith Jonathan Webster looking for a different address entirely and ended up at the wrong gate due to his allegedly impaired state? Was Keith Jonathan Webster following some pattern of behavior consistent with a broader mental health event? Or was there a plan, however loosely formed, that led him to that specific gate at that specific moment? Because the answer to that question determines whether this is a criminal mischief case, a criminal intent case, or something even more serious that has not yet been publicly acknowledged. And that is why I keep saying this. The not guilty plea is not the end of the Keith Jonathan Webster story. The not guilty plea is the beginning. Because now the entire case has to be litigated in open court, which means every detail of that day is going to be pulled into public view. The bar Keith Jonathan Webster allegedly visited. The route Keith Jonathan Webster allegedly followed. The state of intoxication Keith Jonathan Webster was allegedly in. The mental health history Keith Jonathan Webster may or may not have. The vehicle Keith Jonathan Webster was driving. The reason Keith Jonathan Webster was in East Hampton in the first place. All of it, on the record, in front of a judge, and eventually in front of a jury. That is what a not guilty plea unlocks. And that is why the courtroom on July 29th is going to be one of the most watched arraignment continuations in celebrity-adjacent legal history. Meanwhile, on the Chadwick Boseman side of the country, the Los Angeles court is going to have to schedule its own hearings on the brothers' filing. Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman will have to respond formally through counsel. Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman will have to present the accounting they are demanding. The parents' financial situation will have to be documented. The $3 million in bank accounts will have to be verified. The film residual streams will have to be traced. The insurance payouts will have to be located. The intellectual property rights will have to be cataloged. And all of that has to happen in open court, in filings that become public record, in a legal process that turns the entire private grief of the Boseman family into a document trail that every entertainment journalist will pore over line by line. And that is the cruel irony of celebrity death. The people who love Chadwick Boseman the most, the family who grieved him privately for years, are now going to have to grieve him publicly, in a courtroom, with lawyers reading his financial statements out loud into the record. That is not the legacy Chadwick Boseman would have wanted. That is not the closure his parents deserve. And that is not the way his story should end 6 years after his passing. But that is where we are. Fix that before this video is even out of your recommended feed. Now, both of these stories, Jay-Z and Beyoncé's gate, and Chadwick Boseman's estate, are stories that will keep evolving every single week. I promise y'all I will stay locked in on both. The next major beat on the Hamptons case is the July 29th court appearance where Keith Jonathan Webster's defense strategy will start to reveal itself in specific detail. And the next major beat on the Boseman case is the formal response from Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman's legal team, which will almost certainly land within the next 30 days as the procedural clock forces the timeline forward. I will be on both of those beats the moment the paperwork hits the docket. But before I let y'all go, I want to plant one final thought in your minds. Because it is easy, in this celebrity news cycle, to consume these stories as entertainment. It is easy to scroll through the headlines about Jay-Z and Beyoncé's gate, to shake our heads at the strangeness of Keith Jonathan Webster's not guilty plea, and to move on to the next story in the feed. It is easy to read the Chadwick Boseman filing, to feel the sadness for a moment, and then to let it slide into the background of a busy day. But these are real people. These are real families. These are real losses. Beyoncé and Jay-Z have children inside that Hamptons estate. Chadwick Boseman had parents who are watching their son's legacy be pulled apart in open court. Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman is a widow whose grief is now being litigated in public. Kevin Boseman and Derek Boseman are brothers who are fighting for what they believe belongs to their mother and father. And Keith Jonathan Webster is a man whose day in East Hampton is going to shape the rest of his life. There are no cartoon characters in these stories. There are only people. And the way we consume these stories matters. And I want to add one more layer that has been living rent-free in my mind since I started reporting on the Hamptons collision. The children. Because it is very easy, in the rush of a viral headline, to forget that Jay-Z and Beyoncé are parents. Blue Ivy, Rumi, and Sir Carter are children who move through that East Hampton property, who play in the yards, who eat in the kitchens, who sleep in the bedrooms of that home. And whether Jay-Z and Beyoncé's kids were physically present on the day of the collision or not, the psychological weight of knowing that a stranger drove a vehicle into your family's gate is the kind of weight that reshapes a childhood. That is a wound that no legal ruling can undo. And Jay-Z and Beyoncé are now going to have to make security decisions about that property that they were probably hoping they would never have to make. Higher walls, deeper setbacks, more cameras, more personnel, more checkpoints. That is the true cost of the Keith Jonathan Webster incident, and no felony conviction is going to reimburse it. So here's what I want from y'all. I want your genuine, honest take in the comments. Do you believe Keith Jonathan Webster's not guilty plea holds any credible legal ground? Or do you believe the physical evidence is going to steamroll him at trial? Do you believe Taylor Simone Ledward Boseman has been intentionally withholding assets from Chadwick Boseman's parents? Or do you believe the brothers are misreading a complicated probate situation? Do you believe Jay-Z and Beyoncé will ever publicly comment on this incident? Or do you believe the silence is going to continue until the case closes? And do you believe, honestly, that the American legal system is capable of delivering a fair outcome in either of these cases, given the celebrity gravity attached to both? Drop your answers in the comments, tag a friend who has been following either of these stories, and let's have the real conversation about it. Because family, the news cycle is going to keep moving. New stories are going to keep breaking. New scandals are going to keep landing. But these two stories, the Hamptons collision and the Boseman estate war, are going to shape the celebrity legal landscape for months to come. And I want us to be the community that is tracking every beat, understanding every filing, and staying ahead of every headline. That is why we do this. That is why y'all keep coming back. And that is why I keep showing up with the receipts. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already, because I am dropping the July 29th courtroom update the moment that gavel comes down, and I do not want y'all to miss the second the story shifts again. Ring that notification bell so the platform actually delivers the update to your feed, because the algorithm has been throwing punches at creators like me for weeks, and I need y'all inside the notification circle to keep the news flowing. Give this video a thumbs up if any single moment of this breakdown made you rethink what you thought you knew about either of these cases. And drop your comments below, because I read them. I respond to as many as I can, and the best takes always come from y'all. 2 courtrooms, 2 coasts, 1 single news cycle, and a set of stories that just cracked wide open in ways nobody saw coming 24 hours ago. Jay-Z and Beyoncé are being tested by the American legal system on the East Coast. Chadwick Boseman's family is being tested by the American legal system on the West Coast. And every single one of us is watching in real time as fame, family, money, and grief collide in the most public possible way. Stay locked in, stay subscribed, and stay ready. Because I promise y'all, the next chapter of both of these stories is going to hit even harder than the one we just walked through tonight. Catch you in the next update, family.